Hello, I'm David Hunt, and welcome to The Art Hunter. My guest today, well, hold on, I looked it up. I researched and I looked up what her role is in life as a professional person. What defines a writer? The noun. A person engaged in writing books, articles, stories, etc., especially as an occupation or profession. An author or journalist, a person with comments and thoughts of where they're going. Yep, she's a writer, and that explains exactly what she's like. Then there's her history. A foreign correspondent for one of our major newspapers in this country. She also worked in finance, entertainment, like feature stories, travel, art, an editor. Wow, there you go. And that's only some of it. And also she was a TV presenter at one stage as well. Welcome to The Art Hunter and a friend of mine, Julietta Jameson. Hello.
Hi, David. I'm exhausted just listening to that.
Did I cover everything?
I started in radio, actually, so you missed the radio bit. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I did my cadetship. I started my cadetship at 3DB at the Herald and Weekly Times, racing and more racing. And then I went to the ABC for a couple of years, which was fabulous.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Where did it start for you as a journalist? You know, like the writing, where did it come about?
Well,
I know there's a family connection, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, my dad is a journalist, but that was almost reason not to be a journalist because my father was quite, I was the youngest of six, and he was not a very good dad. He was a very good mate, and he worked for the Melbourne Truth for a long time. And, I'm not going to tell any, it was actually. In those days they were breaking stories.
They were.
But he wasn't a father to me. But when I always loved literature. We were surrounded by books. We were poor, but we had books. And my mum was very, very generous with her knowledge of literature. It was a joy to be around her and our books. But in my second last year of high school, I wrote an essay, and my literature teacher commented, "You surely must be God's gift to journalism." And I went, "Perhaps I am." So away I went. Yeah.
Okay. And did you study it when you left school?
I studied. I did an arts degree at Monash.
Okay.
Because I wasn't sure that I would get a cadetship. They were really hard to get. I mean, they're harder to get now, I imagine. Yep. So I did arts at Monash, and then I went to RMIT and did a diploma in business. And just at the end of that, actually, I had a choice between, I was offered a job at Mushroom Records and a job at the Herald and Weekly Times, and I chose the Herald and Weekly Times. Did
your dad's name help you in that sort of arena?
I'll tell you, at the Herald and Weekly Times it didn't, because he was a renegade, a real renegade.
Which that was the truth reporting, wasn't it?
And he was. It probably helped when I switched to the ABC, because he was well loved at the ABC, because he started there. But certainly at the HWT, it wasn't. Bill Hoey, who was head of the company then, editorial manager or whatever it was then, he was a very, very strict Catholic man, and my dad would have been just anathema to him. But fortunately, he liked me, because I used to just turn up in his office at the drop of a hat. Back in the days when there was no security to stop you.
Right. Yep.
I'd make something on my sewing machine, take the day off school, and off I'd trot. And then he'd say, "I'll come in, you've had more returns than Dame Nellie Melba." But they used to have this 20 questions thing to try and to test you to become a cadet, and I was a hopeless examinee. I got really anxious, so I could never answer them.
Okay.
So he took pity on me and got me into the 3DB when somebody else quit.
Right. So how have you changed in that respect? Because you were doing radio and then television, and the quality of the journalism that you've done, which we'll get to. But how did you have to work hard at because that's it's a nervousness, and it's also a shyness.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting, because I described myself as an extrovert introvert. I can be quite shy, but I'm pretty good at, I've done a lot of writers' festivals and public speaking and stuff. And there's a couple of times where I've thought, with touch my microphone, where I thought I was going to vomit. But I guess I just, as I've got older, I just believe in my truth, I think, and whether that truth is vulnerability and frailty and nerves, or whether it's my message, it is really just about sort of trust in yourself, I think.
Yeah.
But I learnt so much in radio, and I loved TV. There was just something about it that was huge fun. But when I my first big writing gig was with Business Review Weekly.
Yes.
Like in the 80s, business was the glamour round. Like it was, there were takeovers. BHP was being taken over by Robert Holmes à Court. Like it was fantastic.
Yep.
But my first story, I wrote it like a school essay, and Robert Gottliebson, who is a venerable journalist, just came up to my desk and quietly said, I'm going to make a journalist out of you. So just have a listen to what I have to say. And he didn't need to tell me twice.
Right.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And along that journey, and that's when I got to meet you as well, is that we threw in like sort of curveballs where you interviewed the manager of Crowded House.
At Business Review Weekly, yeah. I interviewed Crowded House for Business Review Weekly, and that was just unheard of. And I recall that they absolutely loved it. We had such a blast.
And what about the paper? Were they happy with getting somebody? Because that would have been quite different at that stage.
It was. I think it was like the business of, because I feel like that they were quite groundbreaking for an Australian / New Zealander band. That their success was like really complete in some ways. You had the Easy Beats and others, and perhaps In Excess were huge, but there was always some sort of fallibility or frailty to their fame, whereas the Crowdies were just consummate songwriters, a perfect outfit, wonderful people. I think that's why they said yes to that story.
Right, okay. And then eventually you ended up being a foreign correspondent.
Yeah.
So with who?
That was with News Limited. So I moved up to Sydney I'm going to say, it was shortly after my mother died while I was up there. So my then partner was an actor, and Shanahan's asked him to move up, so I moved up with him, and it ended up being the most fabulous thing for my career. I mean, as you know, the relationship was a disaster, but it was...
I hope he's watching.
I've written about it extensively.
Right, okay.
But it was, it was terrific for my career. And I was working on the Daily Telegraph. It was the very right-wing paper that it is now, but it had an evenness to it.
It did, yes.
So I was the anti-Miranda. So I was a columnist, and they'd get me into, write the sort of more lefty stuff, such as was my want. And then John Hartigan, they just believed in me, and they offered me Los Angeles, where I went for a few years. And
how did you find that?
Oh God, I loved it. They had to drag me home kicking and screaming.
Yeah. So you covered everything, didn't you, for them?
Yeah, like everything from celebrity and movies to, mass shootings and all sorts of things. To John Bonet. Do you recall John Bonet Ramsey, the little beauty queen that was murdered? I went to Boulder for that on the Boxing Day after, and it was an incredible experience.
Yeah.
And back then, when people had budgets too, so I had a car and I had an expense account. I stayed in good hotels. It was marvellous.
Not like now. You take your cut lunch and let's stay at your
in
grandmother's place. So I've read so many of your articles, and I've actually commented to you over the years that you're such a good writer.
Thanks,
because a lot of time, and I read newspapers every day, still do. I love sitting in a cafe flipping the pages. But I always wanted to finish the end of your stories, where most articles I read, I get to the second or third paragraph and I stop reading because I'm getting bored or whatever. Obviously you had that advice early, but how did you get the craft of making somebody like me stay interested, or were you conscious of that?
Always conscious of it. It does come quite naturally to me. I do think in Act 1, Act 2, Act 3.
Right.
But I've always been very conscious of the fact that you have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. There are structural points, such as using an echo of some description. You might, if it's a feature, for instance, you might start with a scene that you end. It's a snippet of something that you end with. You've got to not bury the lead, as they say. You've got to grab people's attention, and then you can't just fill it up with boring stuff to start with. Like, the boring stuff can come 2/3 of the way through if you insist on boring stuff, but you have to hook the reader. And you know, I'm really, passionate. It's a terrible word, but I am passionate about that. The craft is everything.
Now, around us is some of the covers of books that you've been involved in. Very varied.
Yeah. Although there are threads, but yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about Cliffy.
Oh, okay.
How did that come about?
That's quite interesting. That's a good place to start, actually. Well, how it started was...
And who is he?
So Cliff Young was a ultra marathon runner in the mid-1980s who was known as the shuffling gumboot wearing Cliffy, who came from the Otway Ranges and surprised not just Australia but the world by winning a race along the Hume Highway from... It started at Westfield in Sydney and finished at... It's either Chadstone, it was Doncaster shopping town, sorry. And he was a remarkable...
just simple person.
Really simple, but pretty clever. And what I discovered... So how I came to the book was... I'd pitched to my publisher a book about the Hume Highway because I'm fascinated by the Hume, all the little places off it. You know, there are really interesting stories there. And they didn't want it, but a telemovie was being made.
Yes.
And the producer, Nigel, pitched a book to, I think it was Text Publishing, yes, and they loved the idea. And then they remembered that I had pitched this other idea on the Hume, and they're like, well, we've got a writer who's interested in the Hume. And I've written a lot of stories about people. So the connection really was that I'm fascinated by the fact that every single person has a story. Every story is amazing. And the Cliffy story appealed to me on a number of levels because there's a couple of ties to a couple of the other books actually. But I just wanted to find out who the real Cliffy was because I remembered all the stuff about him and about his young bride and him winning this thing and all the money and the accolades, and then he sort of became a bit of a punchline and a bit of a joke in the end. So I wanted to find out who the real Cliffy was.
Right. Well, you mentioned the thread. Come on, take us on that thread.
So my first non-fiction book, Tibooburra and the Legend of the Tree of Knowledge.
Now, you didn't want to talk about that today.
No, that's the novel, not that one. The novel In Her Mother's House.
Right.
We can not talk about that later. So Tibooburra came about when, at the end of 1999, the Daily Telegraph put teams of journalists and photographers in Winnebagos and sent us out across New South Wales to record what New South Wales was at the turn of, into 2000, which wasn't really the turn of the millennium, but anyway, whatever. Yep. And I went to Tibooburra on that trip, and my then agent said, "Is there a book in it?" And I said, "Yes, there is," because it's similar with my travel writing too. That place made me question things about myself, about what it meant to be an Australian, about what I knew about our country outside my small part of it, and about how people lived and survived, and so my inquisitiveness about both myself, because I think every writer is trying to find out stuff about themselves. My inquisitiveness led me there, and the connection to Tibooburra really is that was this great Australian story. And
so it was a road trip you did.
I lived in Tibooburra for 2 months, but I didn't have a car at the time. And our mutual friend Anne, her dad had just died in Adelaide, and she had a very old Magna sitting It had done 30,000 and she lent it to me. So off I went into the outback in a Magna. Oh my goodness, the road trip was. I mean, I didn't know that you had to go slowly through puddles. And it bucketed down. So I was stuck in Broken Hill for a week and finally was like, screw this, I'm going. And come to big tracts of water in the middle of the road and just, I swear to God, and this is the honest truth of it, I would scream, plant my foot, and go flying. Fortunately, it caused the car to
spin.
So I was able to back out because it didn't have front wheel drive. So look, all's well that end well, and I didn't die.
And you were by yourself, travelling by yourself. Whoa.
So when I got there...
Did you write about that?
Yes, I did.
Yeah,
when I got
and that was the funny part of that book. Yeah.
When I got there and the car was just caked in mud, and they all came out of the pub and went, oh, it's been quite a journey. All right, come in, have a beer, and that was it, so... And
you're proud of that book?
I'm really proud of Tibooburra. I love that book, actually.
Yeah, so did I. I really enjoyed reading it.
Yeah. I think I created good character. But the characters were amazing. They're just incredible people and incredibly open and generous. And yeah, I really loved that book. Yeah.
All right. What's the next link?
So the next link is to The Ties That Bind, 6 Journeys of a Lifetime. Now, that was similarly... Eden Gehar is a TV presenter and producer, and he is the nephew of my then agent, and he had done a TV show on SBS called The Ties That Bind, this 6 Journeys of a Lifetime, which is really a pre-runner to Who Do You Think You Are? He went back to their countries of origin with Wendy Matthews, Mary Custis, Jay Langaya, Cindy Pan and Craig Wing, rugby player. I'm just having to think now. But again, it was so it was the writing for the TV connection, but also just getting inside someone's story and finding out who they were and exploring more than what was on the screen.
Yeah, because it's so edited, isn't it? And like you don't really sometimes find out the true story behind it, and you keep on wanting more.
Yeah. Well, Cliffy, they took some poetic license. It wasn't absolutely true to the story, whereas my book, I was able to really be that, and and the book was highly praised for that. I was very fortunate that I met some people just before they passed away. Some of Cliffy's incredible trainer, and his brother and a few other people who just painted a beautiful portrait of quite an interesting man. Yeah. I do like to immerse in story. And Christmas Island was another one where I went into place and wanted to find the real story. So that was after the Tampa affair, which is actually 20 years ago in August. So I'm actually currently re-editing that one to re-release it as an ebook, because it's a pretty incredible. It's incredible to think that 20 years later, we thought that things might get better with regards to refugees in this country, but they've just got worse and worse and worse. It was the same as 9/11. So, but it was going somewhere to find out the real story and talking to regular people on the ground and seeing,
the crabs. Did you talk
and
to
the red crab? I talked to the crabs. Actually, the bit that I'm editing at the moment is it was like the second night I was there or something, and it rained, and I walked out into my living room and there were just red crabs on the flywire, because they just go up and over the building. Oh my gosh, incredible. They take a route from, so I don't know if, I should explain that our Christmas Island has this endemic species of red crabs that every wet season around October, November, they come from the top of the rainforest.
Yeah.
And they migrate down to the beach to mate in swathes, absolute seas of crabs. And they've been doing it, obviously, as long as they've been there. So, and people have built buildings and things in the way. So they just go up and over them.
But why do people build in the way?
Oh, because people are assholes, But fortunately now, the national parks people are much stronger there, and they've built... under like tunnels under roads and things.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Because when I was
Yep.
there, they were just being squashed.
Oh.
And they can make it to like 20 years and then
Oh,
they get
gosh.
and it's horrendous,
Yeah,
you know, it's
yeah.
just, so now they're really looking after them,
Right.
which is great. But still the buildings are there, so they
Yeah.
don't care, they just go up
Wow.
and over.
I love that. I love that. Now, we're totally, you know, like doing a real turn here. Byron.
Yeah.
Whoa. Where did the love affair and the interest come?
Well, so as I mentioned, my mum was very, very literate, and we were surrounded by books. We were surrounded by poetry, and mum and I really shared a love of poetry. I used to write it as a kid, and I loved to read them. And Byron, to me, George Gordon, Lord Byron, was when they described him as mad, bad and dangerous to know. You know, the ladies loved him. He was an extraordinary poet, but he was also a traveller. I love to travel. And I found myself quoting him and you'd go past a hotel in Europe and it'd be called the Lord Byron, and I was communicating with one of the travel editors I worked for, and I said, oh, it's funny, you know, Byron keeps popping up in my work. And she goes, here's an idea. You travelling, following the travels of Lord Byron. I went, oh my goodness me, Sarah, that is an amazing idea. And so I pitched it to my then publisher and or my agent, and yeah, she got a deal for me for it. So I spent 3 months following the second lot of travels of Lord Byron. The first travels were in the Middle East because he wanted to travel, and it was during the Napoleonic Wars, and so Europe was sort of off the agenda then. But he got exiled from, so it was the 1800s, 1700s, 1800s. He got exiled from London pretty much for being a mad rooter. So, and potentially I think rumoured to be having sex with his sister.
Oh,
I mean, you know, come on. There was
back in the
day.
day.
Good old days, you know. So he took off on his second grand tour and went via the Swiss Alps across to Italy, and spent a lot of time in Italy in excellent locations. He had great taste in real estate, including Venice, and then was recruited to go and fight for the Greeks, which is where he died. But he, because he loved Greece, and the Greeks loved him because he was a great champion of the Greek people. So I followed him, but I also, it was around the Eat, Pray, Love time, and you know, a lot of women of a certain age were doing their soul searching very publicly, and I took the opportunity to do that because I'd been through some stuff. I sort of identified myself as having a big drinking problem, and had gone into the AA rooms and all sorts of things, and I felt like I had a story to tell, that I could help people, because you may gather, I wear my heart on my sleeve to a great degree, and I believe that if you can talk, you should talk, and if you have a platform and you can help people, you should. And that is the little book that could. I continue to get emails from people saying, I picked up your book at just the right time in my life, thank you.
How important is that, you know, like to actually get feedback, and especially in this era now? When you first started, you wouldn't have got it so much because of social media wasn't really there.
No.
What is it like now when you actually get feedback from somebody?
So, I mean, it's been, Cliffy was my last book. I haven't written one for a while because although the feedback for that was great. I find Goodreads can be like TripAdvisor, that those who write there usually want to have a go at you, whereas the people who really love your book will seek you out and send you a message on Facebook or and that's really gratifying. You know, it's you have to take the good with the bad, and you have to take it, I guess, with an equal degree of grain of salt, but you can't help but be heartened when somebody says that you've literally saved their life at some point. Yeah. Wow.
And Byron, what a nice thing when you get comments about that.
Yeah.
Now, talking about Byron and being a big traveller, you do a lot of travelling, and you do it as part of being a journalist. Apart from being a writer of books, your day job per se is a freelance journalist. And obviously it's come to a bit of a grinding halt right now because of that thing called COVID. But what is it about writing about like travel, that the romance, is it the romance you see?
There is a romance to it. There definitely is a romance to it. I found journalism to be increasingly hard because your messages, I felt that there was the bandwidth was closing, and not that there was ever, I was never put under any explicit instructions to not write certain things, but it just became harder to express sort of in the way that I wanted to, I guess, and long form journalism was going the way of the dodo, really. So I had this. I had a foray into magazine world. I had a very sort of disastrous, dramatic turn as a women's magazine editor that ended horribly, and I never should have been there, and blah blah blah. And I took myself off to Italy for the first time, and I wrote a travel story there. I'd always loved Travel and Leisure magazine. I would always almost lick it, with those beautiful photos and
take it to the toilet with you and all that.
Something like that. And so I wrote this story, and it got published, and then I had an opportunity to work at the Sun Herald in Sydney at Fairfax, thanks to a really great guy, Phil McLean, who was an editor that championed me. And the travel editor went on maternity leave, and I got her gig, and I was, the literal pig in doo-doo. It was just so fantastic, and I just got the bug for it. So it is, in terms of the stories you can tell, they're always good stories, and they're stories about people, place, and time, and those are the three touchstones for me. I always say I write to make sense of the world, and hopefully make sense of it for other people as well. And with travel, you can really do that if you approach it in that way. Some people don't, but that's how I feel about it.
Okay, now moving along, this is all very new, and not a lot of people know about it. You're starting to write scripts for film, and you've got 2, and they're both looking as if they're going to get up, which is unheard of.
It's unbelievable. Well, so it's a new thing, except that my very first book was a novel that I told you that I didn't want to talk about. And
notice I haven't mentioned it.
And I originally wrote it as a screenplay.
Right.
And when I was in LA, I went to a seminar where this agent said there are more books published and more films made from books than there are films, so write a book if you can. So I turned it in a book and it got published. And I have a number of screenplays in the bottom drawer from the early 80s, really. But when lockdown happened, so at the end of 2019, myself, my sister, and a really good friend of ours who is a film producer and film financier took ourselves off to Torquay to stay at an Airbnb and see Elton John. And we were watching what we call crappy Christmas movies on Netflix. And Craig said, there's money in these things. I said, I'll write you one. And so I wrote the synopsis and sent it off to him, and he goes, that's pretty good. And then when lockdown happened, I went, what else have I got to do? So I just turned up at my desk every day and started to write it. And it was a really joyous process. And Craig showed it to a very, very well-noted director who I can't really mention the name of, but he said, you know what, this is not crappy, so but you need to elevate it. So rather than dumbing it down, we're going to make sort of a classic Christmas. And again, it's a rom-com, it's a love story, it's a bit of the hijinks, but it also plays back to my love of movies of the 40s that I used to watch with Mum.
Your mother has featured a lot today.
Yeah, she has. I mean, she is. That's interesting. Yeah, she is. She's long gone, but the writer I am, and I think the thinker I am, is in large part due to her.
Yeah, it's very much looking as if it's going to be picked up, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been optioned, and there is it's all in play. It's all in play. The director is busy on something else at the moment, but that's the way it is. But also, it needs to be shot in either the French Alps or somewhere. It needs to be somewhere snowy. They keep saying to me, lose the sleigh. I'm like, I'm not losing my sleigh, okay?
Okay, so did you go, like, as a kid? Did you go to
No,
boggaming no?
I find people who ski to be the silliest people in the world. Sorry, skiers, but it's quite funny. I've travelled a lot, and I know the romance of it, and I know what it looks like, and I've experienced it. I've been up the top of mountains and been skidooed down, and stood up there going, "What are you doing up here? It's so cold and horrible. You're dressed like you're on the moon for a reason. You shouldn't be here." But it's very romantic.
Yeah, and the fires at night and all those stories.
Yeah, one of the greatest things, actually, I have to say, when I was in Canada, I've been in the snow many times, and there was one night that is one of the most memorable for me at the Fairmont Whistler.
Oh, Whistler, yeah.
And being in an outdoor spa with the snow coming down with a glass of Pinot Noir and people just jumping out and making snow angels and then jumping back. It was just glorious. Après ski, I'm all for.
Is that in the script?
No, it's not. Should be though.
Should be, yeah.
Thanks.
So the other script, where's that going?
So
is it in a totally different direction?
It's still, I do think a bit in rom-com. Like, I've been I started there's another interesting part of this. I started another novel, and I showed it to a particular publisher, and they sort of said, "Oh, it's a bit too commercial." And a friend of mine went, "Like, in what planet is anything too commercial?"
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, I can do something that celebrates the way I think in, I don't think cliches are a terrible thing. I think they're a shortcut language that people understand, and if you use them cleverly, hopefully, and thoughtfully, then that's what you do. You touch people in a way that they instantly understand. So I love a bit of a rom-com, and so this one is that. It's based on true events. I don't want to give too much away.
No, don't.
But I started to write this one, and then it has some Indian characters in it, and I offered it to somebody in the Indian film industry. I asked them to read it as a consultant because cultural appropriation is the last thing I want. I said, if it's not to be, please tell me. And he read it and he just fell in love with it, and he wants to direct it. So that's,
Whoa.
I know, it's just, and that is just snowballing now. It's pretty amazing. I feel very, very, very fortunate.
Yeah. But the other side of it is it's a long journey, isn't it?
Oh, like it's so far away. Anything
yeah.
can happen. People get scripts optioned all the time and nothing happens. But, it's better than nothing.
Absolutely.
I could have learnt French and mastered a souffle or something, but...
Wow. But that's not what you do. You're a writer.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's your art, it's your craft.
Yeah.
So stick with what you do.
Yeah.
And that journey. And when, it would be too easy. Life would be too easy if all of a sudden that happened.
Yeah, well, please make it happen. Don't listen to David, God.
I want it to happen for you. I want it to happen.
But I think that the thing about that to me is that is never giving up on your dreams.
Yes.
Like, just never stop dreaming.
Yep.
I honestly, some of my heroes, like Irma Bombeck, who's a columnist in New York, she had a family of like 5 kids or something, and just started writing when she was in her mid-50s, I think, and then became one of America's most loved ever columnists. Her stuff was so good. She sold millions of books before she died. A friend of mine, who's long gone now, she was in her mid-70s and she had 2 novels published.
Wow.
And and they were bestsellers, and that's the great thing about writing, actually. You can, anyone can do it if you want to do it. I mean, you have to get lucky, obviously.
Yep.
There's a great deal of fortune in there.
Yep.
But
and it's and the fact that you're in the know as well, so it helps for you.
Yeah, definitely with the film thing, that really helped with the first one, because Craig is very, very connected, and and he's one of those people that just makes things happen. He's a delight in that way. Let's see.
Now you help out a bit editing these days, and also as a journalist you edit stories for papers as well as editing. What do you think of editors? What's do you like them, or do you dislike them? Especially considering that you have a better understanding now as life goes on.
Well,
I know the book that you don't want to talk about, The Elephant in the Room, and you put it down to bad editing, didn't you?
I felt that the edit, not that it was a bad edit, it just was not...
Or you're covering your ass here, are you?
No, it was not, it didn't turn out the book that I wanted it to be.
Right.
And it was very personal because it was, it's largely, a lot of it is autobiographical. It was about the main character's mother dies, and she sort of retreats into her mother's life and has to sort of box her way out to find herself again. And there's a lot of stuff from childhood and whatnot in there. But it was a little bit mortifying for me. There's a word missing on the first line of the second chapter, and I've never gotten over it. I've never been able to open it again since I saw that.
Yeah.
I've never been able to actually look at it. It's really funny, but maybe I will, because as I said, I'm editing Christmas Island at the moment, and I could have a second crack at it if I really wanted to.
Yeah.
People liked the book. I don't know why I'm being such a Nancy about it, but
are you like that about all of your writing?
I'm super critical of myself.
Are you? Yeah. I wouldn't have guessed that. I don't see that in you.
Yeah, I think, and that's about back to the editing question.
Yep.
I think you have to. There's an editing edict called "Kill Your Darlings," which if you really, really are into a paragraph that you've written, you think it's the cleverest thing that you've written, you probably should get rid of it, because you're probably being a bit of a dick. Like you're probably overwritten, or it's probably too highfalutin, or it's too fancy. At the very least, go back and have a look at it.
Yeah.
And with editing, I mean, some editors have been like the greatest. Cole Allen, who was my editor at the Daily Telegraph, ended up editing the New York Post and became incredibly famous in New York, like a celebrity himself. And but he just taught me more about what a real story was. There was a time when I found out that it was summer, and some banana paddle pop mixture had made it into the chocolate paddle pops, so there was going to be a chocolate paddle pops shortage. And I told him, and he's like, "Oh mate, that's a fantastic story." I'm like, "No, Cole, it's not." And he said, "It's front page news." And so he just guided me into like the great paddle pop shortage of whatever year it was.
I love that.
Yeah, and sure enough, I got up in the morning. It was on on the stands, on the posters everywhere. And then when I got into the office that day, they just plastered my desk with all the posters. But he had a nose for it. Cole has a nose for a great story.
Yeah.
That's a good editor.
That's a great editor. So do you reflect on that sometimes when you're editing something yourself?
Yeah, I always
other
do.
people?
Everything that I've learned. I mean, there's that kind of editorial direction, and then there's copy editing, the getting in there and refining and hopefully making something better, and helping writers achieve a better voice. And it really appeals to me in this kind of problem-solving way. There's just something in my brain that finds it very soothing to edit. I love being able to go, oh no, the lead is in paragraph 6 and it should be in paragraph 2. It's just something that I really enjoy. It's like crossword puzzles for me.
But it's also very much an art, isn't it?
I think so.
And it's an art that takes a long time to develop.
Yeah, it does. I don't think I would, I've been an editor. I actually learnt to edit I've been everywhere, by the way, in journalism, and I worked at Who Weekly when it was a Time Inc. magazine and a very good magazine, and I got to go to Banda Aceh after the tsunami actually with Who. That's the kind of magazine it was then. But they have a system called Time Speak, or they did when they were owned by Time, and there are very specific ways of expressing things about structure, about like it was prescriptive. So their writers would write files, and their editors and feature writers would then take those files and write them to a very prescribed.
Whoa.
I imagine maybe Time still works in that way.
Yeah.
And I took those. I love those principles. I feel like I had a crash course in the science of it then, and then you've got to add, hopefully, a bit of talent and a bit of flair and a bit of acumen.
Yeah, brilliant. thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you.
And I can't wait to see the next chapter after these 2 films are made.
Me too.
Yeah, Julietta Jameson, thank you so much for chatting with us. I'm David Hunt, and we'll see you on the Art Hunter set again real soon.